Dr Thanet is a general practitioner in Thurley, a residential suburb of Fulchester. He prescribed the contraceptive pill for Linda Phelps, a 15-year-old girl, without consulting her mother. Mrs Phelps found out, and after a family row, Linda ran away from home and hasn't been seen since. Mrs Phelps wrote a petition protesting about the doctor's actions and attempted to obtain the signatures of his patients as they arrived for the surgery. Dr Thanet now brings an action for libel in the Crown Court.
Dr Thanet, would you like to tell the court why you prescribed the contraceptive pill for Linda Phelps?
Well, I thought that she needed them.
Yes, of course, Doctor, but why did she need them?
Her medical condition, physical and psychological, indicated that treatment.
I shall have to ask you to be more explicit, Doctor. What was the nature of the medical condition?
I find myself in some difficulty here. My lord?
Yes.
The whole of this case has arisen because I felt myself unable to break the confidence of a patient. I thought it ethically wrong and damaging to the long-term interests of my patient. I still feel the same.
Oh, I understand that, Doctor. But you have brought this action against the defendant? You claim that she maliciously published an unfair statement about you. How you prove that? Up to you. But prove it you must, if your action is to succeed.
I understand that, my lord. I hope that the jury will want their doctors, too, to maintain at whatever cost the confidences they hold about them.
Yeah, well, yes, yes.
My lord. Dr Thanet, we must make this very clear. You are not prepared to state the exact reasons why you prescribed the pill to Linda Phelps.
That is correct.
And you do realize that is a very dangerous course to take?
Well, it's unfortunate, but it's all I can do.
Very well. So all you are prepared to say is that, using your best professional judgment, you thought it right in the situation to prescribe as you did?
Yes.
But surely, Doctor, you must have realized how dangerous it was to prescribe the pill without consulting the child's mother.
Yes, and I did everything I could think of to get Linda to bring her mother to me so we could discuss the problem.
You asked Linda to bring her mother along?
Oh, yes, indeed.
But Linda wouldn't do that?
No.
Were you surprised?
No.
Did you know Mrs Phelps?
Well, all the family were patients of mine.
Why were you not surprised that Linda couldn't talk to her mother?
Because she is an insensitive and self-centered woman.
But she is Linda's mother.
Yes, and up to the age of puberty, a reasonable and caring mother. But she is manifestly incapable of understanding the needs of a 15-year-old girl. I mean, Linda told me herself...
My lord, Linda is not here, and as far as we know, will not be giving evidence in this trial.
Yes, quite so. Doctor, you may not say what Linda said to you. It's what we all call hearsay evidence.
My lord, with respect, we are in great difficulties, as Linda cannot be found.
Yes, but my lord, my client contends that her disappearance was due in part to Dr Thanet's behaviour. It ill becomes my learned friend to try to use that disappearance to gain sympathy for his client.
Mr Cross, I have ruled against hearing what Linda is alleged to have said. To elicit the point, you'll have to use your wits.
Thank you, my lord. Doctor, after Linda had talked to you about her mother, what did you think?
Well, I knew it'd be very difficult for Linda to get her mother to understand, but I felt if I could get them together, then we could discuss the problem.
Did you explain that to Linda?
Yes, but unfortunately I didn't succeed, so I had to take a decision. And I decided that the long-term interests of Linda were paramount. And providing she didn't become pregnant, I was and am convinced that by the time she becomes 18, she will have overcome her adolescent difficulties and settled down.
So, Doctor, for what you state were sound medical reasons, you prescribed the pill for Linda Phelps.
Yes.
Now, just let us establish one thing, Doctor. The contraceptive pill has other therapeutic uses, has it not, apart from the prevention of conception?
Oh, yes, it is sometimes used in the treatment of dysmenorrhea. That is painful menstruation.
And is it often so prescribed?
Yes, I believe in certain parts of Southern Ireland the incidence of dysmenorrhea is extremely high. The pill is often prescribed to remedy it.
Oh, but, my lord, may
Mr.
I...
Harvesty, if you're going to raise what I think you're going to raise, would you prefer to leave it for cross-examination?
As your lordship pleases.
Now, Doctor, let us come to the night of the 25th of April. That was the night that Mrs. Phelps came round to your house. Do you recall that night?
Indeed I do, yes.
Would you tell the court what happened?
Yes, it was about 11:30. My wife and I had just gone to bed. There was a hammering at the door. Mrs. Phelps was on the doorstep. She was a hysterical condition. She shouted at me and said I was evil and vicious. I asked her to come in, but she refused. I urged her to come in, and she said, I won't step over your threshold to save my life. And she went on about my perverting her child and corrupting...
Just a minute. Yeah.
By this time, I had had enough. And I said, either come in or go home. And I took her by the arm, but she ran off to the front gate screaming, I'll see to it that you never practice medicine again.
What happened then?
Well, I waited for a few minutes to allow her to get home, and then rang.
And did Mrs. Phelps answer the phone?
No, Mr. Phelps. He, too, was very abusive, but I did ascertain the fact that she had, in fact, arrived home safely. I advised Mr. Phelps to send for another doctor and rang off.
Why did you do that, advise Mr. Phelps to send for another doctor?
Oh, I was worried about her.
Did you try to speak to Mrs. Phelps after this incident?
Several times, yes.
Were all your attempts at explanation and reconciliation thwarted?
Yes.
And what happened next?
Nothing for about, a couple of weeks, and I saw her standing outside the surgery one morning when I drove up. She was stopping my patients and asking them to sign a petition. I asked her what she was doing, and she said, I'm putting paid to you once and for all. Well, I asked her to see a copy, and she tore off the top sheet and gave it to me. There are, she said, place it beside your medical certificates.
Is this the piece of paper that she gave you?
Yes, it is.
My lord, it reads, we, the undersigned, being residents of Thurley, Fulchester, protest against the actions of Dr. J.H. Thanet in prescribing contraceptive pills to underage girls on demand without their parents' consent or even knowledge, thereby being a corrupting and evil influence.
My lord, the defence accepts that that petition, as read, was published by the defendant.
Very well.
Dr. Thanet, what did you do when you read this?
Well, I immediately contacted my solicitors and sought advice.
Precisely. Now, just let's take the terms of this petition. Do you prescribe contraceptive pills to underage girls on demand?
No, of course not, nor to anyone else if it comes to that. I prescribe to the medical needs of my patient as I see fit.
I see. And what about without their parents' consent or even knowledge? Do you habitually do that?
No, of course. It was a serious step to take, and I took it extremely reluctantly. However, my first duty is to my patient. And I did urge Linda to let me consult her mother, and I did think very carefully over a period of 3 days before I prescribed.
Quite. Finally, we come to the phrase corrupting and evil influence. Dr. Thanet, do you regard yourself as a corrupter of young girls?
No, of course not. And nor do I think that 15-year-old girls are well advised to have sexual intercourse. But there are worse things, more corrupting things than that.
What, for example?
Pregnancy, abortion.
Dr. Thanet, why do you think that Mrs. Phelps published this libel?
Well, I
Mr.
can only...
Cross, surely that is a matter for the jury to decide.
So be it, my lord. Let us now take the phrase prescribed contraceptive pills on demand. What precisely did you take that to mean?
Well, that I just gave pills out to anybody that wanted them.
Do you do that?
No, it would be very dangerous, especially if a woman had a circulatory problem.
So you do not prescribe contraceptive pills to anyone on demand?
No, that would be professional negligence.
Well, what about a 15-year-old girl? If she had a normal circulation, would you be happy to prescribe the pill for her?
No, very unhappy. But a doctor is sometimes placed in this position, having to choose between evil. I mean, society wants it both ways. They realize it's a very large teenage market, and they try to sell it everything. Sometimes using techniques of sexual stimulation tied to specific products, books, records, drink, everything. Adults bombard teenagers with sex. And then when they've turned them on and the teenager says, yes, I've got the deodorant, the records, the books, where's the sex? Society throws up its hands in horror and denies the teenager the outlet for the energy that adult society has stimulated. Well, that isn't fair.
Would you prescribe the pill for any girl that you thought was overstimulated?
No, it's not as simple as that. Adolescence is a time of physical awareness, true, but it's a time of a growing awareness of the adult world, of books, work, politics, and so on. It's a time of trying things out, experimentation, but it has to be tentative and gradual. And it needs the sympathy of adults and parents to reassure, to provide support.
Well, what if they don't have this? Would you then be prepared to prescribe the pill?
Only in the last resort. Now, whether it's natural for a 15-year-old girl to have sexual intercourse, and in many parts of the world they do, we have to realize that in our society now it is not acceptable to the mass of the people. So when a girl of 15 is regularly having intercourse, she is thought odd. She's left out, isolated. This at a time when she most needs affection, warmth, and love. So when a girl has crashed through these barriers, we have a very serious situation. And it is very important not to let this situation get worse.
By not allowing the girl to become pregnant?
Oh, precisely. Now, human beings are pretty resilient, and it is very likely that by the time the girl becomes 18 or 20, she will have come out of it. But it is not so likely if she is an unmarried mother or has to carry the added guilt of an abortion.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yes, Mr. Harvester.
Well, we've all listened with great interest to your lecture on the ills of contemporary society. But I put it to you, Dr. Thanet, that we don't really know if any of that's relevant, do we?
I don't know what you mean.
Did you prescribe contraceptive pills to Linda Phelps so that she could have sexual intercourse without fear of the consequences?
My lord, I have already said that I did not want to discuss the reasons why I prescribed the pill.
Yes, my lord, I'm aware of your earlier leniency with the plaintiff and sympathise with the reasons for it, of course, but my learned friend hinted in his examination in chief that perhaps the prescription was given not as a contraceptive, but as a drug against dysmenorrhea. And I submit that I must be able to cross-examine on this point.
Yes, Doctor, I haven't changed my mind since my previous ruling, but defendant's counsel is right. You have given evidence about the alternative uses of the contraceptive pill, and therefore learned counsel fully entitled to cross-examine you on that point. Therefore, you must answer his questions, this time on pain of contempt if you refuse.
Thank you, my lord. I'll repeat the question, Dr. Thanet. Did you prescribe...
No, I did not.
I'm afraid I don't understand your answer. Did you or did you not prescribe the contraceptive pill to Linda Phelps?
Well, yes, but not for the reasons you asked.
Well, did you prescribe it as a drug against dysmenorrhea?
No.
Did you prescribe it to prevent her becoming pregnant?
Yes.
Then did you prescribe the contraceptive pill to Linda Phelps so that she could have intercourse without worrying about the consequences?
There are other consequences attached to sexual intercourse besides pregnancy. Now, VD, for example.
Yes.
And the pill does nothing to prevent that.
No, I see. Thank you, Doctor. Do you believe that you really helped Linda by encouraging her to such an extent that she's found it necessary to run away from home?
Well, I do not accept that I did that.
No, of course you don't. But you cannot tell us what was so pressing that you found it necessary to violate the moral codes of her family.
Well, I could, but I chose not to for ethical reasons.
Well, that's very convenient.
No, it's very inconvenient, actually. But that's a problem with moral codes. They are not designed for our convenience in the short term.
Well, let's come to the night when Mrs. Phelps came to your house. I put it to you, Doctor, that she only became very upset when you refused to answer her very reasonable and legitimate questions.
No.
You refused to allow her to come into your house.
That's ridiculous. I asked her to come in.
Well, further, when she insisted on coming in, you pushed her from the doorstep.
I wanted her to come in.
You admitted that you took her by the arm.
I didn't admit it. I stated it.
Ah, but yes, you also stated that Mrs. Phelps said, and I quote here, she wouldn't step over my threshold to save her life.
Well, that's right, yes.
Later you said you took her by the arm to urge her to come in.
Yes.
Or to drag her into a house which she'd sworn never again to enter. Surely you didn't think you could do that, did you?
I didn't drag her in.
I suggest that it was this rough treatment which caused Mrs. Phelps to say that she'd see you never practiced again.
My lord, surely the plaintiff cannot be asked to speculate on the motivation of the defendant's words?
You know better than that, Mr. Harvison.
Yes, I'm sorry, my lord. Dr. Thanet, you said that Mrs. Phelps attempted to collect signatures on this petition out of malice.
Oh, well, it must be. She certainly never attempted to discuss the case in any rational way.
Oh, if she had, you would have discussed the case with her?
With Linda's permission, yes, of course.
Yes, but, Doctor, you know that Linda had run away. And to this day, the police haven't been able to trace her.
Well, I didn't know it that night, and neither, presumably, did Mrs. Phelps.
Nevertheless, Doctor, nevertheless, you say that even if Mrs. Phelps had wanted to discuss this case with you, you would not have done so.
Well, under the circumstances then prevailing, no.
Well, don't you think, then, Doctor, that Mrs. Phelps's action can be seen as a desperate remedy when no other was available?
No, a petition would not mend the rift between herself and her daughter, even if every patient on my list signed it.
Well,
no, I see it as a revenge for an imagined wrong.
Imagined? Dr. Thanet, did Mrs. Phelps only imagine that you prescribed the pill to her daughter without her knowledge?
No.
Has she imagined that her daughter's run away?
No.
Do you have a daughter, Doctor?
Yes.
How old is she?
12.
If in 3 years' time your wife discovers that she has contraceptive pills prescribed by another doctor without your consent, do you think you'll only imagine that you're concerned, upset even?
No.
No. Thank you, Doctor. No further questions.
How would you feel, Doctor, if you found your daughter in 3 years' time had been prescribed contraceptive pills without your knowledge?
I would feel very upset. I would feel that I profoundly failed my daughter.
Thank you, Doctor. You are Dr. Leonard Oak?
I am.
And you practice medicine at Thurley, Fulchester, as a partner of Dr. John Thanet, the plaintiff?
I do.
Dr. Oak, when did you first become aware of any problem concerning the treatment of Linda Phelps?
After surgery on the morning of April the 16th, Dr. Thanet told me certain details regarding Linda, and we discussed them over coffee.
What was Dr. Thanet's attitude?
Well, my lord, I find myself in somewhat of a difficulty. I feel that I cannot undermine my partner's decision not to reveal details of the case.
The court understands that, Doctor, but could you tell the court in general terms what Dr. Thanet's attitude was?
Well, he was very concerned.
Concerned? Could you elaborate a little, Doctor?
Yes, well, he felt that he had to take a decision in regard to Linda as to whether or not to prescribe the contraceptive pill, and he was convinced that he could not get Linda to bring her mother along.
Would you say that Dr. Thanet was in any way flippant or casual about the way he was talking of the problem of Linda Phelps?
Oh, certainly not. He was very worried about it.
And can you confirm from your knowledge of Dr. Thanet's usual practice that there is no question of prescribing the contraceptive pill on demand?
Absolutely. He always acted in his patients' interests as he saw them.
Would you describe Linda as a deprived child?
Not in the accepted sense of the word. She lacked affection, yes. Just simple cuddling, I should say. And it is these simple physical intimacies which allow children, as they grow up, to remain in contact with their parents, to ask them things and to tell them things. I think that Mrs. Phelps did everything that she thought was right in regard to Linda, but I would have said that the relationship was perhaps a little cold.
Yes. And if Linda found that her need for this simple affection was not being met in the home, would you be surprised if she sought it elsewhere?
I shouldn't be surprised at all. In fact, I should have expected it.
Thank you, Doctor.
In all your experience, Doctor, have you ever found it necessary to prescribe contraceptives for simple affection?
Yes. That may surprise a cynical lawyer, but it is sometimes found with married couples.
But Linda wasn't married, was she?
Oh, no.
Not even allowed by law to be married.
No.
But you have nothing but approval for Dr. Thanet's action.
I feel that he acted in this matter according to his conscience after a great deal of thought.
Yes, of course you do, Dr. Oak. You are, after all, a partner in an enterprise which depends for its continued success on Dr. Thanet's winning this case.
I doubt it. I trust the common sense of most of my patients.
My lord, Dr. Oak is not on trial here, and I would protest at my learned friend's innuendo.
Oh, my lord, Dr. Oak has given evidence as to Dr. Thanet's character. Surely I may be allowed to establish what weight and validity that testimony should have?
Oh, quite so, Mr. Harvester, but try to do that at this stage by cross-examination. Your comments would be better left for your speech to the jury.
Yes, as your lordship pleases. Let's come to the defendant in this case, Mrs. Phelps. How long have you known her?
Oh, some 12 years or so?
Before this case, has she ever struck you as a malicious person?
No.
But Dr. Thanet would have us believe that she is so malicious that she would ruin his professional reputation with completely unfounded allegations.
I believe that, certainly.
Really? You believe that after, a dozen years of perfectly normal and ordinary behavior, Mrs. Phelps has suddenly become some monster of malice?
I believe that she is trying to destroy my partner's reputation by means of unfounded allegations.
That's a tendency you've not noticed before.
True. But then she hasn't been so stressed before. So it's not surprising. Daughter running away from home.
Yes, quite so, Doctor. Quite so. We've heard that Dr. Thanet worried about his decision for 3 days.
Yes, that's correct.
That doesn't seem to me to be very long to take over a crucial decision.
Well, I understand that Dr. Thanet had asked Linda to return in 3 days.
Well, so he'd said to himself, had he, I'll give myself 3 days to consider it?
Oh, no. No, Linda was due back in 3 days in any case to get the result of some tests.
Oh, what tests were these?
Well, I'm afraid I cannot answer that question.
You cannot or will not?
Well, I must support the stand taken by my partners.
My lord, I really must protest. My client is standing trial here for a serious allegation of libel, and her defense is being impeded at every turn by the refusal of witnesses to answer questions.
Dr. Oak, I order you to answer. This time on pain of contempt of court. If you refuse, I shall have no option but to commit you to prison until such time as you've purged your contempt.
Very well, my lord. The tests I referred to were pregnancy tests.
Yes.
I don't see how that helps your client, and it certainly may harm Linda.
Doctor, you really mustn't comment from the witness box. You're here to give evidence. It is for the jury to draw conclusions.
I'm sorry, my lord.
Let's return to your talks with Dr. Thanet. What was your attitude to the problem which he set you?
Well, it was a very difficult problem, and I trusted that Dr. Thanet would act in accordance with his conscience.
Yes, you said that before, Dr. Oak. Don't you mean that he would make the right decision, do the right thing?
Well, obviously the right thing is debatable.
Let's not
but
beat about the bush, Dr. Oak. Did you believe that Dr. Thanet was making the right decision?
No.
You thought then that Dr. Thanet should not have prescribed the pill to Linda Phelps?
Yes, but you
Right,
see...
Thank you, Dr. Oak, for your evidence. I've no more questions, my lord.
The jury is composed of members of the general public. The case of Thanet against Phelps will be continued tomorrow in the Crown Court. Dr Thanet, a general practitioner in Fulchester, prescribed the pill for Mrs Phelps' 15-year-old daughter without telling her mother. Mrs Phelps organised a petition stating that Dr Thanet was an evil influence in the town. The doctor is suing Mrs Phelps for libel. In the witness box is Dr Oak, Thanet's partner.
Dr. Oak, you said that you advised Dr. Thanet against prescribing the pill for Linda.
Yes, that is so.
Would you tell the court why you advised against it?
I thought it politically inadvisable.
Politically? That's a strange word, Dr. Oak.
Well, I mean, I thought that Dr. Thanet would inevitably land himself in precisely the mess that he has done when the mother found out.
You say when? Was there any doubt that it would be discovered?
Well, no, not really. In cases of this kind, the mother almost invariably finds out. It's almost as if the girl wants her to.
So your concern for your partner was based on your anticipation of Mrs. Phelps's likely reaction?
Yes, that is so.
And your advice to your partner was not to prescribe the pill, although you both thought it the right thing to do?
Well, I'm not very proud of the fact, but yes, that is precisely the reason for my advice.
Thank you, Doctor. No questions, my lord.
Thank you, Dr. Oak. You may leave the witness box.
I call Mr. Colin Phelps. You are Mr. Colin Phelps?
I am.
The husband of Winifred Phelps, the defendant?
Yes, I am.
Mr. Phelps, what was your attitude to your wife's action in writing and circulating this petition?
My lord, can this witness be compelled to give evidence against his wife?
My lord, with respect to my friend, the matter is governed by the Criminal Evidence Act 1898, Section 1, Paragraph D, which provides nothing in this act shall make a husband compellable to disclose any communication made to him by his wife during the marriage. I submit, my lord, that my question does not come under that prohibition.
My lord, my learned friend asked what was Mr. Phelps's attitude to his wife's action. Presumably he told his wife, and thus that information is privileged.
I am inclined to agree with Mr. Cross, but perhaps, Mr. Cross, to be on the safe side, you could approach the question rather differently.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Phelps, we have here a copy of the petition. Presumably in your home you have others, some with signatures on?
Yes.
Is one of those signatures yours?
No.
Why not?
Sorry, my lord, but I fail to see the relevance of this line of questioning.
My lord, I want to establish the plaintiff's good faith by demonstrating that over and over again he tried to effect a reconciliation with the defendant.
Oh, I shall certainly allow that, but I fail to see how this line of questioning helps you to do it.
If I may crave your lordship's indulgence for just a moment, it will become clear.
Oh, will it? Oh. Nevertheless, I'm sure you know I don't need to remind you, Mr. Cross, but I will inform Mr. Phelps that he need not give evidence against his wife of their privileged conversations.
Thank you, my lord. Mr. Phelps, you did not sign the petition, did you?
No.
Now, I don't want to know what you told your wife, but would you please tell me, would you sign that petition now?
Yes, come on, give it to me, I'll sign it.
What? Surely, if you wouldn't sign the petition then, why would you sign it now?
Well, I agree with it now. As a matter of fact, I've always agreed with it. What it says, I just didn't want to make a public case out of it.
I see. But are you not sorry that your daughter's name is in every newspaper in the country?
Well, of course.
But so great was your wife's desire for revenge that she insisted.
No, most improper.
I'm sorry, my lord. Mr. Phelps, do you recall the telephone conversation with Dr. Thanet the night that Mrs. Phelps came round to his house?
Yes, I do.
And what was that conversation about?
Well, there wasn't any conversation.
Well, presumably you didn't just stand mute, listening to nothing.
I told him we didn't want to talk to him and rang off.
Can you remember what was said before that?
He kept saying he wanted to meet us and discuss Linda with us. I just thought he was trying to save himself from all this trouble.
And perhaps protect Linda from the consequences of all the publicity, as you yourself wanted to do?
No, to protect himself. He'd taken the easy way out, and he didn't expect to pay for it.
Thank you, my lord. I have no further questions.
Mr.
No, I have no questions at all, my lord.
You may leave the witness box.
You are Dr. Helen Chinnery?
I am.
a consultant child psychiatrist at Fulchester Hospital?
I am.
Are you acquainted with Dr. Thanet?
I am professionally. He has referred some cases to me, and we meet from time to time at medical social functions.
But you're not close friends.
No.
Did Dr. Thanet refer Linda Phelps to you?
He rang me up and told me about her and asked if I would see her as a matter of urgency. I said I would, but she ran away before her appointment was fixed.
Did Dr. Thanet give you the impression of a man acting carelessly or even corruptly?
Oh, absolutely not. As I recall it, he urged me to see her at the earliest possible time.
I must confess myself a little baffled. What are you trying to prove with this witness?
My lord, I want to establish that the fact of prescribing the contraceptive pill might be the best possible medical choice available at any particular time.
Well, that may be. But the weakness of your whole case is that your client is not prepared to say whether or not it was.
So be it, my lord. Now, Doctor, it is not part of the plaintiff's case that Mrs. Phelps was in any legal sense a careless or cruel mother, but can you tell us from your experience whether you have met with cases where apparently first-class parents have proved inadequate to the needs of an adolescent?
Oh, it's very common. Adolescents often give the impression of being very grown up, and physically they may be. But they do need the active support of parents and an understanding support.
And if such an adolescent found an adult whom they came to trust with their confidence and later learned that that confidence had been betrayed, what then would be the reaction of that adolescent?
Shattering, I should think.
Why?
If Dr. Thanet is in that position, I can only say he is selflessly acting in the interests of his patient. Wherever she is, she will know there is an adult she can trust.
Thank you, Dr. Chinnery.
Well now, Doctor, do you have any evidence at all from your own knowledge that Linda Phelps was such a case?
No.
No. Thank you. I won't waste any more of your time.
No. You may leave the witness box, thank you.
My lord, before I close my case, may I have a word with my client?
Yes, I think that would be a good idea.
Are you quite sure you won't give evidence about the girl?
Yes.
Well, you do realize that we've nowhere near established a case against Mrs. Phelps?
It can't be helped.
Very well. That is the case for the plaintiff, my lord.
My lord, I should like to submit that there is no case for my client to answer. In his opening address to the jury, my learned friend said that he would show that the statement complained of was both untrue and made out of malice by the defendant. In my submission, he's brought very little evidence to support either contention.
My lord, I do realize that the extremely high standard of professional ethics accepted by my client does make it very difficult, but I do submit that we have established a case for the malice displayed by the defendant.
Yes, I am inclined to agree with Mr. Cross. Please present your case, Mr. Harvester.
If your lordship pleases. My lord, might I call a character witness, the Reverend Alan Moore, to give evidence before the defendant? He has to attend an ecumenical conference this afternoon, of which he's chairman.
Mr. Cross?
No
certainly,
objection,
certainly. Yes.
Thank you, my lord. You are the Reverend Alan Moore,
Yes, I am.
and you are the rector of Thurley Parish Church?
Correct?
Do you know the Phelps family?
Yes, very well. They've been parishioners and regular church attenders of mine ever since I've been here. That's about 5 years.
So you know Linda?
Oh, yes. Member of the Sunday school, and I prepared her for her confirmation about 18 months ago.
Did you? I see. And has Mrs. Phelps been active in the church?
She's a member of the Mothers' Union. And she's on the rota for the Altar Flowers and helps with various fundraising activities in the church.
Yeah, so you would say, would you, that Mrs. Phelps's church membership means a great deal to her?
Indeed, I would.
Have you ever thought of her as a malicious person?
No. On the contrary, I've always found her kind and generous.
What about Linda? Did she ever seem to you to be some monster of depravity?
My
Oh,
lord.
yes, Mr. I'm sure you'll want to rephrase that question, Mr. Harvester.
Yes, I'm sorry, my lord. What sort of girl is Linda Phelps?
Well, she's a perfectly normal, healthy girl.
When she suddenly left home and the reasons for it became public knowledge, were you surprised?
Yes. I was appalled.
From what you know of Linda, can you imagine her going to a doctor for advice on contraception?
My lord, we seem to be examining the Reverend Moore's imagination.
Yes, I shall rephrase that question, my lord. Were you under the impression, or did you have any indication at all, that Linda Phelps wanted or even needed advice on contraception?
None whatsoever. And from what I know of Linda, I would have thought it was totally unnecessary.
Did you hear the evidence of Dr. Chinnery?
Oh, yes.
Well, presumably both she and Dr. Thanet would claim that in many cases prescribing the pill to an underage girl was the best choice amongst evil.
My lord, my learned friend is inviting the witness to speculate.
My lord, it was my learned friend who insisted that this case should turn on general questions. I should have thought that the Reverend Moore was an expert witness in evil.
Well, let's get on.
Well, sir?
Well, I cannot accept the choice of evil's argument. The moral code is absolute. We may still love the sinner, indeed we must, but hate the sin and fight against it.
And you would hold, would you, that for Linda Phelps, sexual intercourse was sinful, or evil, as Mrs. Phelps called it, and to use that term was fair comment?
Oh, yes, indeed I would. We don't help adolescents by allowing them freedom which they're too young to handle. That is the cruelty.
And anyone who does so, or helps them to too much freedom, may be called a corrupter.
That is an accurate description, I would have thought.
Reverend Alan Moore, you said that your moral code was absolute.
Yes.
I have a feeling Dr. Thanet would agree with you there. He spoke about a moral code when he refused to answer questions about Linda.
Well, I cannot help thinking that Dr. Thanet's moral code is very selective.
Nevertheless, you must surely sympathize with his stand. You presumably would never break a confidence entrusted to you by a member of your flock.
No. And I wouldn't give contraceptive pills to a 15-year-old girl, either.
When did you last see Linda Phelps?
Christmas, I think. Yes, she came to the midnight service on Christmas Eve.
But when did you last see her to talk to?
Well, probably a month or two.
Or 3?
Well, yes, possibly.
So you can't say for certain that you've talked to Linda at all seriously for the last 9 months, or maybe even a year?
Linda hasn't been so regular in her church attendances of late. It does happen from time to time that young people drop off a little.
Drop off or drop out?
What on earth does that mean?
It means, my lord, to reject the values of conventional society.
Why not use that phrase? After all, this is a court of English law.
Yes, my lord. Do you mean that young teenagers tend to reject the values that you have tried to teach them?
Sometimes. But I had no indication that Linda had done that.
So all you can say with any certainty is that a year ago you didn't notice anything untoward in Linda's attitude.
Yes.
But surely, Reverend Alan Moore, you must realize that a 15-year-old girl is going through a period of intense physical change.
Yes, but if a girl has been brought up from a stable background and has been taught to respect herself and others, the onset of puberty need not be so cataclysmic.
Yes, but we do know that something cataclysmic was occurring to Linda or in Linda.
I can only imagine that something or someone seriously disturbed the careful upbringing that she'd had.
Yes, but your imagination is not evidence, Reverend Moore. Do you think that Linda had such an upbringing?
Yes, I'm totally convinced of it.
Wouldn't rigid be a better word to describe Mrs. Phelps's attitudes?
No, I never found that.
You said that Mrs. Phelps, rather, was a member of the Mothers' Union.
Yes, a very devoted member.
An organization that seeks to resist changes in family life brought about by a more compassionate society.
It seeks to uphold the traditional values of family and marriage. I do not believe that it is a sign of compassion to disturb those.
Well, certainly the Mothers' Union has shown a compassionate regard to the position of some distressed women. I believe there was a supplemental royal charter that made it possible for some divorced women to join.
Yes.
As a mark of that compassion you mentioned.
Correct.
And what was Mrs. Phelps's attitude? Did she approve of this compassionate move?
No. She felt that there was no need for the change.
In fact, wouldn't you say that she fought against it as hard as she could?
Yes, I would. But her resistance flowed from sincere conviction.
And you agreed with her?
No, I didn't.
Oh, why not, Reverend Moore?
Well, I believe that there are certain categories of divorced women who want to join and shouldn't be prevented from doing so because someone else has wronged them.
Oh, that seems to me a very compassionate attitude, but Mrs. Phelps didn't hold that view, did she?
No. She was sorry for these women, of course, but felt that society would be better served if at least one group held out strongly against divorce.
And she would sacrifice the needs of the individual for a wider social good?
Yes, you could put it like that. But I must emphasize that these views were sincerely held.
The sincerity of Mrs. Phelps's rigid views is not in question. Now let us turn to another point concerning the Mothers' Union. I believe that in your branch recently there was a debate on a resolution for the annual conference concerning sex education in schools. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was that resolution? Tell us about it.
Well, it was proposed by Mrs. Phelps and sought to condemn any form of sex education in schools.
Did the branch pass it?
No, they didn't.
So, they didn't agree with Mrs. Phelps's narrow outlook.
They felt that some form of sex education was desirable.
And you agreed with them?
Yes, I did.
So once again you found yourself on the opposite side of debate to Mrs. Phelps?
Yes.
But you testified that Mrs. Phelps was not rigid.
Not in her own home. Though she opposed, for example, sex education in schools, I feel sure that in her own home she was most careful to ensure a proper education.
Yes, but you can't know exactly how that education was carried out, can you?
No. But what I can say is that she would have sincerely
Mr.
tried...
Moore, you keep using the word sincere. Would you accept, for example, that Hitler sincerely thought the Jews were a threat to Germany?
Well.
And that he sincerely thought it his duty to kill them all in order to protect his beloved fatherland?
Yes, that is possible.
So does it matter if Mrs. Phelps was sincere or not? What matters is what she was sincere about.
Well, you could say that, yes.
Thank you, Reverend Moore.
Let's just clear up this business of sincerity, shall we? Do you mean that Mrs. Phelps was sincere in the same way as Hitler was?
No, of course not.
Or that she would sympathize with genocide or even anti-Semitism?
Certainly not.
No. Would you say then that what she was sincere about was her determination to uphold family life and to see that her daughter learned about the facts of life within the love and the security of her own home?
Precisely.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. No further questions, my lord.
Thank you. You may leave the witness box.
I call Mrs. Winifred Phelps. Mrs. Phelps, why did you try to organize a petition of Dr. Thanet's patients against him?
I thought it was my duty.
Your duty?
Yes. I had seen the way in which his actions had succeeded in breaking up my family. I thought someone ought to do something about it.
Yes, but the doctor in any community is a very important person, and such a petition could be very damaging to him.
Well, it was meant to be. It's because the doctor is such an important person in the area that I thought I ought to do something.
Yes, well, will you tell us exactly what happened?
I found a packet of contraceptive pills in Linda's dressing table drawer. I was deeply shocked. I thought she must have got them from a girl at school. When she came home, I asked her about them. She was very rude, and that upset me even more. I told her I was worried about her, that the pills could be very dangerous. She said she'd seen a doctor and he had prescribed them, but she wouldn't say who it was. Later, I had an idea. I went to her diary, and I found it was Dr. Thanet.
I see. What time was that?
Oh, about 8 o'clock. Linda had gone to the youth club. I was deeply shocked. 2 or 3 times I picked up the telephone to ring the doctor, but my courage failed me. I finally decided to wait until my husband came home. He'd had an appointment in Leeds. and I knew he wouldn't be home until about 10 o'clock. When he came in, I told him, and he was deeply shocked too. When Linda came home, there was the most dreadful row which upset us all. I remember her shouting, "If Dr. Thanet thinks it's all right, then what are you so worried about?" She stormed off to bed. I said I was going round to see the doctor right away, and my husband said he'd stay to see that Linda was all right.
You went round to Dr. Thanet's?
Yes. When I went there, I still thought there would be a very good explanation. I mean, well, you don't think a doctor would do a thing like that without a very good reason.
And did you ask him for an explanation?
Well, I begged him to talk to me, but all he kept saying was that he couldn't discuss the case with me without my daughter.
Did you ask to go inside his house?
I begged him to let me in, but he wouldn't hear of it. Finally, he pushed me off the doorstep and slammed the door in my face.
This made you very angry, did it?
Not then, not angry. I was past all emotion, really. It felt as though the bottom had dropped out of my world. I just went home.
What did you find there?
Linda had gone to bed. I went in to speak to her, but she wouldn't say anything, so I kissed her good night and said we'd talk about it in the morning when we were all more calm.
And did you?
No. In the morning, Linda had gone. She must have packed a few things in the night and left. We haven't seen her from that day until now.
I do realize how upsetting this must be for you, but, Mrs. Phelps, I must ask you a few more questions.
Yes, I'll be all right.
I take it that you tried to find your daughter?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, we got in touch with the police right away. We contacted newspapers, did everything, but there's been no word.
Oh, I see. So you decided to raise a petition?
Well, someone had to do it, and I had nothing more to lose, had I? I'd lost my only daughter. Nothing else mattered.
But you did it solely because you were concerned with the moral health of the community?
Yes, that's right. Well, there was nothing personal or malicious in it. I mean, I had nothing to gain by it. I just thought it right that attention should be drawn to Dr. Thanet's methods. Yes. I only wish someone had done it sooner, then perhaps I wouldn't have found myself in this present mess.
Thank you, Mrs. Phelps.
Yes.
My lord,
Linda!
Mrs. Phelps, just a minute. You're still giving evidence.
Yes, but it's Linda.
Yes.
My lord, may I request an adjournment? We, too, have tried to contact Linda Phelps as a potential witness for the plaintiff. I would be most grateful if my client's solicitors could interview her before we cross-examine Mrs. Phelps.
Yes. Yes. We will adjourn until tomorrow morning.
The upstanding in court.
The jury is composed of members of the general public. Join us tomorrow when the case of Thanet against Phelps will be concluded in the Crown Court. Dr. Thanet, the general practitioner in Fulchester, prescribed the pill for Mrs. Phelps' 15-year-old daughter without telling her mother. Mrs. Phelps organised a petition stating that Dr. Thanet was an evil influence in the town. The doctor is suing Mrs. Phelps for libel. The daughter Linda has been missing from home since her mother discovered the pills. Yesterday, at the end of her mother's examination in chief and before the cross-examination began, Linda made a surprise appearance at the court. There was an immediate adjournment, and she stayed overnight with Dr. Thanet's solicitors. In the light of her reappearance, the plaintiff's counsel has requested that he reopens his case.
Now, you realize the seriousness of the oath you've just taken?
Yes, sir.
Was it your birthday yesterday?
Yes, I was 16.
Many happy returns of yesterday.
Thank you.
Now, why didn't you go home last night?
Well, I didn't want to. There'd have just been rows, and I don't have to live at home now, do I?
Well, that's debatable. A court could order you to remain at home.
They'd have to catch me first, and they haven't been able to for 3 months.
Yeah, well, yes. Now, did the people who were talking to you last night, did they tell you that your mother wanted to talk to you?
Yes, but I wouldn't.
I see. You want to give evidence in this case?
Yes, my lord.
I shall allow the plaintiff to reopen his case.
Yes, as your lordship pleases.
Oh, but Mr. Cross, you were just about to cross... I don't know where we are.
Yes, my lord, I realise that it's unusual to put a witness between the examination-in-chief and the cross-examination of a witness, but may I make a request that Miss Phelps give her evidence before my learned friend cross-examines the defendant? We have no idea at all about the nature of the evidence that she will give. And my client is the defendant, my lord. You may think that she ought to have a chance to answer any allegations.
Mr. Cross?
Thank
Very
you.
well. Yes, Mr. Cross.
You are Linda Phelps,
Yes,
the daughter of Winifred and Colin Phelps?
yes.
Now, Linda, I want you to tell me why you went to see Dr. Thanet.
I thought I was pregnant.
I see. And what did Dr. Thanet do?
He examined me. He said he thought I wasn't, but he'd take a test and I had to come back in 3 days.
I see. And was that all that happened on that first interview with Dr. Thanet?
Oh, no, he asked all sorts of questions.
What did he ask you?
Well, he said if I was pregnant, who was the father?
And what did you say?
I said I didn't know.
You didn't know the man's name?
No, I meant it could have been 1 or 2 or 3 boys.
I see. I realize this is very embarrassing for you, Linda, but it is most important that I ask these questions.
Yes.
What did Dr. Thanet say then?
He asked if I took any precautions. I said I didn't and that it was very difficult. I just asked the boys to be careful.
And what was the doctor's attitude then?
Well, he was very worried. He explained how easily I could become pregnant.
And did he then just pick up his pad and write you out a prescription there and then?
Well, no, I asked him to, but he wouldn't.
You asked him?
Yes, when he said I could get pregnant, I said you could always put me on the pill. He said it wasn't as easy as that, and he'd have to see me with my mother first.
Now, this is very important, Linda. How sure are you that Dr. Thanet said that before he could prescribe the pill for you, he would need to see your mother?
Oh, certain.
Right. And what did you say?
I said I couldn't do that. I'd just have to stop, if you know what I mean.
Stop having intercourse?
Yes.
Did you mean that?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I don't know if I would have.
You do know better than anyone else.
Well, I suppose I would have tried it for a bit, but I doubt if it had worked. I'd probably have finished up pregnant.
And how did you have so many opportunities?
I used to tell my mother I was going to the church youth club. I'd look in just to show my face. But I'd really go to the coffee bar, go riding on the boys' bikes.
And your mother didn't know?
She knew about one time. There was a terrible row and I promised to stop.
You promised to stop going to the coffee bar?
Yes.
Like you told Dr. Thanet you'd stop having intercourse?
Yes, I suppose so.
I see. What happened when you went back to see Dr. Thanet after the 3 days?
He said I wasn't pregnant and he again asked me to bring my mother along.
And you still refused?
Yes, there just wasn't any point.
But did he urge you?
Yes, he kept on. Then finally he said he would give me the pill, but only 1 month and I'd have to come back for the next lot and bring my mother along with me.
Did he say anything else?
Well, he warned me against the dangers of VD.
Right. Now, Linda, why did you run away?
Well, you can't breathe in that house. Everything has to be just so. My mother's always going on about the evils of pop music. If we had Top of the Pops on the telly, she'd be going on about the noise and the gear. I couldn't even watch Doctor Who when I was little because she said it was violent.
And so you looked for affection elsewhere?
I don't know about affection. I just wanted some fun.
Where did you go after you ran away?
Oh, I went to London. I was very lucky. I got into a squat and I've been there ever since.
But you knew everyone was looking for you.
And what could I do? If I came back, she'd make me live at home, and I wouldn't do that whatever happens.
But you did come back eventually.
Now I'm 16. Ray said he's one of the guys at the squat. He used to be a journalist. He said they were going to roast Dr Thanet because he wouldn't give evidence. So I came back.
To try to help Dr Thanet.
Well, yes, he helped me, didn't he? And she can't touch me now I'm 16.
So let's sum up, shall we? It was you who asked Dr Thanet if you could go on the pill.
Yes.
And he was very reluctant to allow you to.
Yes.
And he did try very hard to get your mother to come along.
Yes.
Thank you, Linda.
Miss Phelps, in the witness box there you have said, on oath, that you've been a liar. Is that true?
About telling my mother where I was going?
Yeah.
I suppose so.
So why should we believe you now?
Well, I'm on oath, aren't I?
I hope you remember that. You didn't want your mother to win this case, did you?
Well, no, of course not. She always thinks she's in the right. It'll do her good to learn that she can be wrong.
So at least part of your motive for coming back was to teach your mother a lesson, was it?
Partly, I suppose so.
Thank you. Now let's get back to this first meeting you had with Dr. Thanet. You say that when he told you that unprotected intercourse was dangerous and he refused to give you the pill, you said, and I quote, "I would just have to stop." That true?
Yes, but...
You actually told Dr. Thanet that you were going to stop having intercourse?
Yes.
But even so, the next time you saw the doctor, he prescribed the pill to you.
Yes.
Did he ask you if you'd had intercourse in those 3 intervening days?
Yes.
And had you?
No.
So far, then, you'd kept your promise to the doctor, but still he prescribed the pill to you. Why?
Perhaps he agreed with you and thought I was a liar.
Yeah, now, Miss Phelps, I will not have pert comments from the witness box. Just answer counsel's questions.
Yes, my lord.
Thank you, my lord. How did you feel when you thought you were pregnant?
I was worried sick.
Yes, I'm sure you were. Presumably you began to doubt the wisdom of having casual sex. Well?
The judge said I was only to answer questions.
Well, I'm afraid I did, Mr. Harvester.
Yes. Did your fear of pregnancy make you doubt the wisdom of continuing to have sexual intercourse?
Without the pill, yes, I suppose it did.
Yet he prescribed the pill. Why?
He said he didn't believe I'd stop.
Yes, well, we shall never know for certain, shall we?
But we do know for certain I'm not pregnant.
So, freed now from all natural inhibition, you've since then continued to sleep around, as it's called?
As a matter of fact, no. It's daft, really, but ever since I've been away from home, I haven't felt much like it. I never really enjoyed it, anyway.
Let's come to the relationship with your mother. Was she really as repressive as you told my learned friend?
Yes.
But looking back, can't you see that her actions were dictated by a concern for you, for your well-being?
Well, I don't think she's deliberately cruel. She's just narrow-minded.
By that, do you mean that she didn't like her 15-year-old daughter having casual sex with boys on motorbikes?
We never had it on the motorbikes. We always got off first.
Now, Miss Phelps, I have warned you about pert comments. If you continue, I shall have to take some action.
I'm sorry, my lord.
Now, Miss Phelps, I'll repeat. Don't you think that you misjudged your mother? That her attitude wasn't narrow-mindedness, but natural concern?
I think she was more concerned for herself.
Yesterday we all saw how much she wanted to talk to you, but you refused.
She drags my names through the courts, makes me a national scandal, and then expects me to want to talk to her.
Very well, let me just put this to you. If Dr. Thanet hadn't prescribed the pill for you, there wouldn't have been any row, would there? And you would have stayed at home, isn't that so?
My lord.
Very well, I've no further questions.
Linda.
Yes, Mr. Cross, I think we should use the same form of address on both sides.
I'm sorry, my lord. Miss Phelps, let us make 1 or 2 things clear, shall we? Were you told last night that your mother wanted to see you?
Yes.
And the decision you arrived at was entirely your own?
Oh, yes. Nobody could drag me back there.
I see. What sex education were you given by your mother?
None, really. I was very frightened when I had my first period, because it was very early. I was only 10. My mother said I was growing up and I must be very careful how I played with boys.
And what did that mean to you?
Nothing at all. I never played with boys. Later on, she used to say I must save myself for my husband. I used to think she talked to me as if I was a green shield stamp. But she never just talked to me. Not just talked. If it was left up to my mother, I'd still believe babies were awarded as some kind of punishment for wearing eyeshadow.
Now, Miss Phelps, I want you to look at your mother and tell me if you love her.
No.
What do you feel for her?
Before I came up here, I thought I hated her. But I don't hate her. I just feel sorry for her.
Thank you, Miss Phelps.
You may leave the witness box. Go and sit over there.
My lord, before my learned friend cross-examines the defendant, may I continue my examination in chief in the light of Miss Phelps' statement?
I have no objection, my lord.
Yes.
Thank you, my lord. I call Mrs. Phelps.
I remind you that you are still on oath.
Yes, my lord.
Yes, I'm sorry to call you again, Mrs. Phelps, but we all realize how much you must have suffered during that examination. But I'm sure you'll want to comment on it.
Yes.
Can you understand how your daughter came to reject her own home?
Well, what do you expect? I mean, everything's against families, isn't it? Even those you count on let you down.
Well, you refer to Dr. Thanet?
Well, of course I do. I was brought up to respect doctors. I mean, you trust them, don't you? And then you come here and you see a total stranger who used to be your daughter telling lies, and it's all his fault. He changed her.
My lord.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Harvester, I think it would be a good idea to adjourn for half an hour.
Court will be upstanding.
Now then, Mrs. Phelps, you feel able to proceed?
Yes, my lord. I'm very sorry. It was just...
Yes.
Mrs. Phelps, do you want to tell the court your response to Linda's evidence?
Yes. I just want to say that it's obvious I have failed in some ways. But I'm not a wicked woman. I do love my daughter. She isn't a total stranger. And I do want to win her back if I can.
Thank you, Mrs. Phelps.
My lord, you do understand, Mrs. Phelps, that I have to probe that assertion. We all sympathize with your distress, but the whole professional life, indeed, the very livelihood of Dr. Thanet here is at stake.
Yes, I understand.
Do you? Why then did you go behind Dr. Thanet's back and try to ruin his professional life?
Well, it wasn't behind his back. It was on his front doorstep in full view of his surgeon.
But you still tried to ruin his professional life.
Well, if his professional life consists of corrupting young girls, then it ought to be ruined. And the law ought to help and not hinder.
You sound as if you tried to use the law to stop Dr. Thanet before this action.
Oh, I did. You can be sure of that.
How?
I went to see a solicitor to try to take out a case against Dr. Thanet.
And what was his advice?
My lord, I must object.
Cross, you know as well as I do that a witness doesn't have to divulge the nature of conversations between her lawyers and herself.
I'm sorry, my lord. Mrs. Phelps, you did take legal advice on the possibility of finding a case against Dr. Thanet?
Yes, I did. But I couldn't, they said. I didn't have a case, they said.
My lord, you will understand that whilst I may be pleased that the witness insists on answering my first question, I am most unwilling to incur any further censure from your lordship.
Your punctiliousness does you great credit, Mr. Cross.
My lord.
Now, Mrs. Phelps, just try only to answer counsel's questions.
Yes, but it's a mockery,
Yes.
isn't it? I try everything I can to bring a case against the doctor, and lawyers say that I haven't a case. Instead, I find myself the defendant, being tried for doing what the law should have done.
Yes, Mr. Harvester, the court has done its best to protect your client. That if she volunteers privileged information, it's up to her.
Yes, quite so.
You decided not to pursue a case against the doctor.
They decided.
Very well, but you were not satisfied.
Well, of course I wasn't.
And so you hit on the idea of this petition.
It was the only thing left.
Didn't occur to you that the practice of medicine would become impossible if every time a doctor made a decision in good faith, no matter how difficult that decision might be, he might find a crusader at his front door trying to ruin him?
How can you say that a decision to give the pill to a 15-year-old girl without her parents' consent was taken in good faith?
But that is precisely what we are saying, Mrs. Phelps. Now, had you any idea of what your daughter felt about you before she ran away?
Well, of course I hadn't. That wasn't the daughter that I knew you saw in the witness box. She's changed out of all recognition. But what do you expect when you encourage a young girl to defy her parents and to run away and live with degenerates?
I suggest, Mrs. Phelps, that the Linda you saw in the box was the product of your upbringing and not of Dr. Thanet's.
No, he's perverted her, changed her.
Mrs. Phelps, Linda has been living with you for 15.5 years. She sees a doctor for what? For half an hour and receives one prescription and, like magic, she's changed?
Yes.
All the values you've tried to teach her thrown out of the window just like that?
Well, we've seen it here today, haven't we?
Well, I put it to you, Mrs. Phelps, that what we have seen here today is precisely the result of your upbringing.
Rubbish.
A young girl rebelling against an overbearing and intolerant mother.
No.
Well, let us see how intolerant and how sensitive you have been. Your daughter was engaging in intercourse before she went to see Dr. Thanet, wasn't she? Why didn't you know?
Perhaps I was too tolerant.
Or unobservant, to say the very least. Let's come to the heart of the problem, shall we? Linda refused again and again to allow you to talk to Dr. Thanet. Now, why?
Well, it's obvious, isn't it? They were both taking the easy path.
Well, easy or not, Mrs. Phelps. Your daughter had travelled a long way down that path before she went to see Dr. Thanet.
It could have been sorted out.
Mrs. Phelps, Linda went to see Dr. Thanet because she thought she was pregnant. She'd missed a period. There she was, living with you for 4 weeks, worrying herself sick, and you didn't even notice.
I thought it was probably her schoolwork. I mean, she was preparing for O-levels.
That you didn't try to find out the reason.
Well, I thought if it was anything serious, she'd tell me.
I must keep coming back to the point, Mrs. Phelps, that she didn't tell you. Worse than that, she wouldn't tell you.
I can't understand that.
Let's see if we can find out the reason, shall we? We've heard from the Reverend Alan Moore that you opposed sex education in school. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Look what's happened to my daughter.
But we've heard from your daughter's own lips that in that connection you completely failed your daughter.
Well, she didn't tell you the whole truth. I also gave her a book when she was 13.
You gave her a book? A teenage child needing the warmth and love of a mother to join with her in the excitement of growing up, and you give her a book?
Well, she could have asked anything she wanted to know.
But how, Mrs. Phelps? How, when you were so embarrassed you couldn't even talk to her, so you give her a book? How is she to communicate with you? By letter?
You're twisting everything.
Did you ever have any frank, open discussions with your daughter about sex?
No.
No. And when she was in trouble, she didn't come to you, she went to the doctor. Now, aren't you pleased she did that, Mrs. Phelps, or would you rather she kept it bottled up in her heart until she had a nervous breakdown?
I would rather she had come to me.
But she felt she couldn't. And what is a doctor to do in those circumstances? If he had failed your daughter, if she had felt she couldn't trust him with her confidence, to whom would she have turned to then?
To me.
Yes. She did, Mrs. Phelps. She did.
She didn't. I found those pills. She didn't tell me.
Where did you find them?
In the top drawer of her dressing table.
And what else was in there? All Linda's private things, no doubt, her souvenirs, her letters, her little secrets, everything that a child has. A place where you have no right to pry.
It wasn't like that at all. It was the drawer where she kept her underclothes.
Oh. And who does the washing and the ironing in your house, Mrs. Phelps?
I do, of course.
And who puts away the clothes?
I do.
Every week?
Yes.
Every week you go to that drawer and put away Linda's clean clothes?
Yes.
And yet this was the drawer. She chose to hide a packet of pills?
She just wasn't thinking.
Wasn't she? I suggest that she was communicating to you with a packet of pills just as you communicated to her with a book.
No.
Then how do you explain her hiding a packet of pills in a place where they were bound to be found?
I don't know.
And what was your response, Mrs. Phelps? Your daughter was in deep trouble. What was your response?
It was all sorts of things. I was deeply shocked. I wondered where she'd got hold of the pills.
Precisely. You were faced with the evidence that your daughter was in some sort of trouble, certainly leading a life that you knew nothing about, and your first thought was about another doctor or a girl, but not about your own daughter.
Well, I was confused. I was angry.
Yes, I know, so angry that at this moment of crisis in your daughter's life, all you could do was to drive her away from the home and force her to go and live with squatters in London.
If she had stayed...
But she didn't. Did she, Mrs. Phelps?
No, but...
Thank you, Mrs. Phelps.
Now, I don't think it's seriously disputed that Mrs. Phelps' petition was defamatory. So it follows, then, that the plaintiff, Dr. Thanet, is entitled to judgment without further ado, unless the defendant, Mrs. Phelps, has established her defence to your satisfaction, that is, on the balance of probabilities. Now, her defence is that the factual assertions contained in that petition were true, and that the comment on those facts was fair and reasonable comment on a matter of common interest between herself and the other patients on Dr. Thanet's panel. And she claims that the words in the petition, thereby being a corrupting and evil influence in the community, were fair comment. Now, if the defendant established her defence to your satisfaction, the plaintiff would still be entitled to judgment, but only if you accept his assertion that Mrs. Phelps's motive in publishing this petition was an overriding desire to harm him, and not, as she claims, a public-spirited desire to inform her fellow patients of the matter. Will you now please retire, elect a foreman, and consider your verdict?
Members of the jury, will your foreman please stand? Please answer this question, yes or no. Have you reached a verdict upon which you are all agreed?
Yes.
And do you find for the plaintiff, Dr. John Thanet, or for the defendant, Mrs. Winifred Phelps?
For the plaintiff.
Judgment was for the plaintiff, Dr. Thanet, for the sum of £5,000, but he refused to accept the money awarded against Mrs. Phelps.